Today we'll be exploring one of El Paso's forgotten neighborhoods, Chihuahuita, an area rich in history and culture. We'll be visiting with Freddie Morales, El Paso historian, on Along the Rio Grande. Welcome once again to Along the Rio Grande. I'm George Torok, and today we have in the studio Freddie Morales, a very well-known El Paso historian and collector of artifacts and memorabilia about the El Paso area. And a few weeks ago, Freddie was kind enough to take us on a tour of Chihuahuita, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, the neighborhood of Chihuahuita, and we'll look at some of that videotape a little bit later in the program. Freddie, welcome to Along the Rio Grande.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we appreciate it. Maybe we ought to talk a little bit about you and how you got interested in history. You spent much of your early life in Chihuahuita.
Yes, I grew up in Chihuahuita from infancy to about 30 years of age. And I always felt that it was rich in history, and I decided to go ahead and do my own research on the history of that neighborhood, and it turned out that it spanned quite some time, going back to the Indians, the Spaniards, the Mexican period, and eventually after the Mexican-American War, the American period.
When did you start gathering material? How did you start doing that?
In the 1970s, a historical task force was created to look into the research of the area to make it a historic district. All the findings resulted in me getting interested in the neighborhood and going to interview a lot of people, and some of them would donate photographs and documents, and eventually it led to me writing a little book on the history of Chihuahuita.
And is this the first big history project that you took on?
No.
You've been gathering things over the years.
Well, after that, I got interested in the history of Juarez, because Juarez is really much more closer in many ways than El Paso, since we're situated right there on the river and right next to the Santa Fe International Bridge. In Juarez, I lasted about 10 years doing a lot of research, and I eventually got interested in El Paso history in about the early 1990s.
So it's the connection of Chihuahuita that led you to an interest in Juarez and then kind of back around to El Paso at that time.
Yes.
Maybe we ought to explain exactly where Chihuahuita is. What is Chihuahuita?
Chihuahuita means little Chihuahua. It is situated in southwest El Paso. The boundaries are South Santa Fe Street toward the east, Charles Road and the Rio Grande and Franklin Canal towards the west, the Santa Fe Railroad Yard to the north, and the board and the Santa Fe Bridge to the south. It's tucked away like a lost sock, but it's been there for at least 3 centuries.
Wow. How did the settlement originate? Well, who were some of the first people to live in that area?
That area in the ancient days was called the ward or Partido Chamizal. It was named after a desert bush that still grows wild here in the El Paso area. And in 1818, we had a settler settle in this area named Ricardo Bruzuelas. He was awarded possibly one of the last Spanish land grants in this region, and he built his 20-room rancho right there where the old El Paso Laundry building sits now.
Oh. And we'll take a look at that laundry building in a few minutes here. So that was kind of the origins of settlement in that area, the first time that there was a concentration of people. What started to bring people into Chihuahuita? When did it really develop as a neighborhood, a residential area?
It really started to develop and be called Chihuahuita right after the Mexican-American War. A lot of people decided that after Chihuahuita was now a part of the United States, that they would decide to stay and become American citizens. Gradually, this small adobe community throughout the next coming decades, grew into a more larger fixed community. And we had even settlers there during the Civil War era like Antonio Noel Montestruc. And we were even there before the railroads came to El Paso.
Oh, I see. And then in the early 20th century, a lot of people moved into that area as a result of things that were happening in Mexico, correct?
Yes, the Mexican Revolution brought a large influx of refugees from the state of Chihuahua, principally, to settle in Chihuahuita. The poor refugees went to Chihuahuita in the Segundo Barrio. The affluent ones settled in Sunset Heights and Golden Hill. The most well-known was Luis Terrazas, that lived in the Fall Mansion in 1913.
Now, some of the features that we'd see in that area, Chihuahuita's kind of changed over time. Originally, there was some military activity and border patrol activity there.
During the Mexican Revolution, we had at least 2 army camps set up by General Blackjack Pershing. The most well-known was Camp Chicas at the end of South Santa Fe Street, and another camp that I've never been able to get their name or infantry number near the water treatment plant. The Mexican Revolution, because of a lot of stray bullets, caused camps to be created along the U.S.-Mexico border.
So some of the fighting was spilling over, some of the shooting was spilling over to this side.
Yes, and several residents from Chihuahuita got killed by stray bullets.
Oh, really? Now, the railroad played an important role in the development of the area as well. What railroad facilities were there in Chihuahuita?
In 1881, in June of 1881, Santa Fe Railroad came to Chihuahuita, and they built their wooden frame depot there and a roundhouse. They erected a water tower and some maintenance shop. When they came, they served as a labor pool for Chihuahuita residents. Some of us got to work in the railroad yard.
And the canal goes through that area today?
The Franklin Canal was erected in 1891 by a company out of Denver. They constructed the canal, and it no longer exists due to the Chamizal dispute. And just lately, the International Water Boundary Commission covered it up.
I see. Well, you were nice enough to take us around Chihuahuita a few weeks ago, and we saw some of the locations of things that we've been talking about here. And we have some videotape from that visit, and I think we'll take a look at some of the different locations in Chihuahuita, some of the sites there, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about how the area has changed over time. Let's take a look at the videotape. We're standing in front of the old El Paso Laundry Building. We're in the heart of Chihuahuita. What are the origins of Chihuahuita?
As you said, we're standing in the heart or the seed of Chihuahuita, or the genesis also of later El Paso, Texas. We date back to a Spanish land grant awarded to Ricardo Bruzuelas in June of 1818. Here is where he settled and built a 20-room rancho. In 1827, he sold the property to Lorenzo del Barrio, and then later to Pedro Ignacio Garcia, who filed a case in court for the origin of the Chamizal dispute.
So we have people moving into the area by the 1820s, 1830s. When does Chihuahuita itself start to develop as an area?
Chihuahuita starts to develop as an area where you see few adobe homes. The reason for that is that the Rio Bravo or the Rio Grande started to meander and cut through Chihuahuita. It flowed through the north, through the south, and even through the middle of this neighborhood. And when it did so, it created a lot of damage of homes, and many decided to flee to higher land.
So people were moving from one location to another.
Yes.
Now, during the Mexican Revolution, that's when a lot of people started to move into this area, and there was a lot of activity here with the revolution?
Yes, the largest influx of immigrants that probably ever occurred in this area happened around 1913. A large exodus of people due to the Mexican Revolution had to cross into the U.S. to seek refuge and safety, and Chihuahuita was a place where they settled and made it their home.
And just before the revolution broke out, President Diaz visited here at one point, right?
Where we're standing exactly in 1909, He came to visit President Depp here in El Paso for a visit. On this spot, when he crossed the border close by, he was greeted by Fort Bliss officials with a 21-gun salute, and from here, he proceeded to go towards downtown.
Now, when was the El Paso Laundry building built?
The El Paso Laundry building dates back to 1891. It became El Paso's oldest and largest cleaning establishment. It was founded by William Harvey from Liverpool, England. He went on to make this a very well-known establishment in the business life of El Paso. They served the El Paso community for over 80 years, and they also served as a labor pool for Chihuahuita residents. This building during the Mexican Revolution was a favorite lookout to see the many battles towards Juarez because it offered a good bird's eye view of the area. And here also during World War II, German prisoners were put here under forced labor by U.S. government officials. The old El Paso Laundry building behind me should be utilized as part of the empowerment zone to refurbish this structure and put it to good use to hire people from the neighborhood. Ideas have been thrown about that it should house a museum, a mercado, and other important concepts. Hopefully the city of El Paso, which has overlooked Chihuahuita, will come to our plight and make this dream become a reality.
We're standing in front of the Chihuahuita apartments, and these were originally built as tenements during the Mexican Revolution era, right?
Yes, they date back to approximately 1916. These brick tenements, also known as presidios to area residents, were built by Armenians, Jews, and Assyrians. The Mexican Revolution brought a large influx of refugees, and they chose Chihuahuita to stay.
Now, after the revolution was over, people continued to live in these tenements. What was life like in a tenement?
Life living here was being meant to live in overcrowded conditions. This area was a slum. 20 families would live in a tenement, and they all had to share 4 restrooms and 2 sinks. There was no hot running water. People here had to go bathe at public showers or in old aluminum, not tin cans, but
Tubs of sort that they used.
And I used to live here, as a matter of fact, right here behind me, and I've seen a lot of change. Now they're real nicely fixed up. They're maintained pretty good by the owner, and people are very happy here.
So originally this was very deplorable conditions, but over the years it's been renovated and fixed up, and still have many people living here today.
Yes, this was considered one of the most deplorable sites in the nation in the 1910s and 20s. It was, and it still is, part of the 3rd poorest zip code in the country. The average per capita income here is about $8,000 to $12,000 per year, but people have come a long way and they're proud of what they've done.
I understand there's some famous people that came from Chihuahuita.
Yes, Chihuahuita had some famous figures like Antonio Montestruc. He arrived here in 1867, and he built a triangular settlement right here where the park is, and it was demolished in 1981. Mr. Montestruc came in an era after the American Civil War and saw El Paso grow, and finally the structure was demolished in 1981.
And who else comes from Chihuahuita?
Well, renowned historian Cleophas Calleros worked and lived in this neighborhood. He had an office close by, and he wrote some very famous books concerning El Paso and Juarez history, in particular the old church of Juarez, the Our Lady of Guadalupe. And we also had, the area had a large percentage of people that went to the various wars. We had one that won the Congressional Medal of Honor, Ambrosio Guillen.
Now, there were some infamous people as well that came from Chihuahuita.
Yes, in particular, during the Prohibition era, We had a very renowned bootlegger by the name of Fausto Prego. He was never caught bootlegging, and he brought a lot of booze from Juarez to El Paso, and then from here they transported it to the night spots downtown. We also had Ignacia Gonzalez, Jaso Gonzalez, very well known as La Nacha. She lived for a while in the tenements on South Chihuahua Street to escape Juarez authorities that were after her.
Now, Charles Street has very Mexican quality to it. The architecture, the design.
Yes, Charles Road, which was established in 1903, when this area was built, they all, in particular along this corridor, were built out of adobe. They're all single story. The architecture mimics a lot of old Mexico. If you walk through this narrow street, a lot of people will get the impression that instead of being in the El Paso area, they're over the river in Juarez. Most of the people are Hispanic, and I like the way that they have decorated their homes. It's a unique part of El Paso, which Chihuahuita, it's kind of like a city in itself. And coming to Charles Road, one can more or less get a feeling of going back way into time.
Now, I understand here on Canal Street there were some tunnels that were used during the Prohibition era.
Yes, Canal Street and Charles Road, most of the homes have basements and tunnels underneath them. And back of me at 409 Canal Road, the house here, during the era of Prohibition, area bootleggers cooperated with Chinese bootleggers to construct a tunnel and smuggle booze from here. At first it was smuggled from across the river into Chihuahuita, and then from Chihuahuita into the downtown area. This business thrived for over 15 years and went undetected.
So these were tunnels that would be running under the street here?
Under the street, under the homes, and even underneath the railroad tracks.
Now we're at the El Paso Water Treatment Plant, and this used to be another neighborhood of Chihuahuita.
Yes, this used to be called the standpipes or Las Pompas. Here, Sylvester Watts erected some standpipes in the middle of the river in 1882, and from there the water was drawn for residents from the city of El Paso. They lived isolated, and they dated back to when Santa Fe Railroad arrived here in 1881.
And some of the Santa Fe Railroad operations were right in this location as well?
Yes, they constructed a roundhouse in back of this water tower. They also had their own water tower. The old steam locomotives would come into the area and be maintained by area residents employed by Santa Fe Railroad.
Now I understand even during the Spanish colonial period, this part of Chihuahuita was active.
It was active in the sense that it served as a pathway that would eventually become the Camino Real, crossing from here, heading towards the Harts Mill area and then beyond into New Mexico. The Camino Real was blazed to completion in about 1598 by Juan de Oñate. Then later in the 1760s, a dam was constructed by the Manso Indians under the supervision of Don Joseph de Sabrado de Orcasitas. They erected it right here across the old Arroyo Colorado that exists straight ahead of me, and it lasted for about a decade and a half. And the road that would eventually cross through here would be then called the Camino a la Presa y a Nuevo Mexico, or the road to the dam. And then to New Mexico.
Well, that was certainly some interesting places that we visited there. A lot of activity in Chihuahuita, a lot of people still living down there. Now, Chihuahuita's changed a bit over the last 20, 30 years or so. What kinds of things have taken place there since the 1970s?
We have had all the tenements rehabilitated. They were constructed during the Mexican Revolution era to house refugees. And at one time, they were part of one of the worst deploring housing conditions here in the nation.
So those tenements that we were visiting there a few minutes ago, those were all rebuilt during the 70s as a result of some of these projects?
Yes, it was long overdue, but it finally happened. We were the last in South El Paso to get financial assistance to rehabilitate the tenements.
What other changes have taken place there? There's a park and community center. How did that come about?
The Chihuahuita Improvement Association that was created in 1976 had proposed a community center and park for the neighborhood because it had never had one in over its 150 years in existence. And after 5 years of battling City Hall and Parks and Recreation, we finally got a long-awaited park, and it's one of the most well-kept parks here in the city.
And the community center, what was the origins of that?
The community center, we desperately needed it because we didn't have a place before to have meetings and band together to combat poverty in the area. That community center is like the nucleus of our neighborhood. It sits where Antonio Montestruc once had his small little rancho there erected in 1867.
And what kinds of things go on at the community center over the years? What types of projects have originated there?
We started activities to help people of all ages. We did a senior citizens center there in 1993, and it's still going on. Right now, there are recreation activities for people of all ages. The Chihuahuita Improvement Association, several times of the year, we use it for holiday programs.
What kind of problems face Chihuahuita today? The Improvement Association continues to meet and talk about some of the needs in the community. What things are they looking at today?
Well, we have been looking at and trying to get the city of El Paso to work with Chihuahuita residents to draft a master plan that would address all the needs that Chihuahuita requires. We have been unsuccessful, but we're not giving up. We still have not even been able to construct a house on vacant land. We're hoping to do this in the 21st century. We're also targeting everybody to get their fair share of desperately needed social services. We would like to see the old El Paso Laundry building refurbished and be made into a multi-purpose facility.
Yeah, we took a look at the building a few minutes ago in the videotape. What kinds of things might you be able to do with that building?
Well, the building is of good, sound structure. If it could be remodeled, the building could serve a multi-purpose use to Chihuahuita and also to the city of El Paso. It would be nice to accommodate maybe a mercado, a bakery, a restaurant, a museum, a gift shop, so many ideas, and at the same time, hire people from the neighborhood, since at one time the old El Paso Laundry building used to hire a lot of people from Chihuahuita.
So employment's one of the problems in that area as well. There isn't as much work available for people.
It has a high unemployment rate. That area is still part of the third poorest zip code in the country. We need jobs more than ever right now.
Any other projects that are in the works? Any other areas that they've been looking at?
We're going to try and promote the history of our barrio. We're talking about beautification projects and refurbishing our present existing murals, and maybe even create new ones in the future if we're able to get funds or donations.
Well, you certainly have a wealth of knowledge about Chihuahuita and the development of that area, but you've worked on a lot of different projects over the years, you know, a great deal about El Paso history in general. What things are you currently working on? What things are you researching?
Right now I'm working on transportation as it relates to the history of the El Paso Juarez area. I've also done work on the Union Plaza district. I've done writings also on early barrios of El Paso, like Smelter Town, Chihuahuita, Segundo Barrio, the El Diablo neighborhood. I've also done a chronology of El Paso and Juarez, even maps that depict the history of the area.
What's the transportation research related to? What are you going to be doing with that?
I'll be covering the going all the way back to Indian trails, then when the carretas came up through here, and all the way up to the railroads, when we had ferries, when we had early bridges constructed, when the trolleys came here, the Union Depot was built, when the first automobile was used, when the first airport was built, so forth and so on.
Going to cover quite a range then. And what's the end product going to be? Are you going to make an exhibit, or are you writing something about it?
Most of the research does lead to exhibits. It led to the creation of the El Paso Juarez Historical Museum in 1993. Since then, we have showed over 60 free historical exhibitions to the people in El Paso and Juarez.
And those exhibits are available to be shown at schools or things of this nature?
They're available to be shown to the public by calling 771-6727. We have been utilizing the El Paso libraries and some museums in town. We also go show exhibitions in some of our public parks.
So there's a great variety of material that you've worked with over the years and a number of different exhibits that you have available. I certainly want to thank you for coming into the studio today and sharing some of your knowledge about Chihuahuita, and certainly taking time to show us around the neighborhood. We hope that some of our viewers can go out and experience Chihuahuita in the future. It's a very pleasant area of the city. And we want to thank all of you for joining us today on Along the Rio Grande, and we hope to see you on our next program.